He looked me in the eye and said, "You're a burden." Then he shoved a $100 bill into my hand and told me to leave. That moment shattered everything I thought I knew about family. And here's the truth. Too many parents face rejection from the very children they raised. But this story doesn't end with heartbreak. 6 months later, the tables turned in a way no one expected. And what happened next, you'll want to see for yourself. "You're a burden," he said, his voice sharp enough to slice through years of sacrifice. He shoved a crumpled $100 bill into my hand, like it was payment for disappearing. And before I could even process the words, the door slammed shut. The sound echoed in my chest, louder than any thunderstorm. I stood there, staring at that bill, wondering how a lifetime of love could be reduced to a single note of rejection. That night wasn't just about losing a roof over my head. It was about losing the one person I thought would always stand beside me. And yet, as painful as that moment was, it became the beginning of a story I never imagined living. Before that night, before those words, there was a lifetime of sacrifice. I raised him alone after his father passed away. Every school fee, every late-night fever, every scraped knee, it was me. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, just to keep the lights on and food on the table. There were nights I came home exhausted, but I still sat with him, helping with homework, listening to his dreams. I believed that if I gave everything, he'd grow up knowing he was loved beyond measure. And for years, I thought that was enough. Statistics show single parents often face twice the financial strain compared to 2-parent households. I lived that reality every day. Rent, bills, groceries, they never waited, and neither did my son's needs. But even in the struggle, I found joy in the small things. His laughter at the dinner table, his excitement over a new pair of shoes, the way he'd fall asleep on my shoulder after a long day. Those moments were my fuel. I thought they built a bond unbreakable. But bonds, I would learn, can stretch thinner than we ever imagine. As the years went on, the weight of bills grew heavier. Rent, utilities, groceries, they never paused, and neither did the demands of life. I stretched every paycheck until it tore, but somehow it was never enough. My son, on the other hand, had dreams bigger than our budget. He wanted to invest in a startup, chase opportunities, live freely without the constant reminder of financial limits. And that's where the cracks began to show. He saw me as the anchor holding him back, while I saw myself as the lifeline keeping us afloat. Arguments became routine, not about love, but about money. And money, as I learned, can turn even the closest bond into a battlefield. Studies show financial stress is one of the leading causes of family conflict, with nearly 70% of households reporting money as their biggest source of tension. I didn't need a study to prove it. I lived it every day. He accused me of being stuck in the past, too cautious, too afraid to take risks. I accused him of being reckless, blind to reality. The truth? We were both right in our own ways. But in those heated exchanges, neither of us cared about truth. We cared about winning. And every fight chipped away at the bond we once thought unbreakable. It all came to a head one evening. The tension that had been simmering for months finally boiled over. He stormed into the living room, frustration written all over his face. "I can't breathe in this house," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. I sat there, drained from another long day, and whispered back, "It's the only home we have." That single exchange carried years of resentment, years of misunderstanding. Neither of us backed down. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the calm before the storm. Hours later, he made his choice, and it was one that would change both of our lives forever. Arguments like this weren't new, but this one felt different. His words weren't just frustration, they were final. He accused me of suffocating his future, of chaining him to a life he didn't want. I accused him of forgetting the sacrifices that built the very foundation he stood on. Psychologists say unresolved conflict often escalates when both sides feel unheard, and that night, neither of us listened. The walls absorbed our anger, but the damage was done. By the time the shouting stopped, I knew something irreversible had shifted. The bond we once had was no longer just strained, it was broken. That night, everything changed. The argument had ended hours earlier, but the silence was heavier than any words we'd spoken. He stood at the doorway, his face cold, his decision final. Without hesitation, he pressed the $100 into my hand and said, "Take this money and don't come back." The door slammed, and the sound wasn't just wood against wood. It was the sound of a bond breaking. I stepped outside, the rain soaking through my clothes, the streetlights casting long shadows that seemed to follow me as I walked away. In that moment, I wasn't just leaving a house. I was leaving behind years of sacrifice, memories, and the belief that family was forever. I remember standing on the curb, clutching that $100 like it was both a lifeline and a curse. Cars passed by, their headlights blinding for a second before fading into the distance, just like the life I once knew. The rain wasn't just water. It was a reminder that the world doesn't pause for heartbreak. Psychologists say rejection activates the same part of the brain as physical pain, and I felt every bit of that science in my chest. Each step I took away from that house felt heavier than the last, but I kept walking, because standing still meant drowning in the silence he left behind. The first days after being cast out were the hardest. I had no plan, no destination, just a bag of clothes, and that crumpled $100. I spent nights in the bus station, sitting upright on cold benches, pretending to sleep while announcements echoed through the hall. Mornings were worse. I wandered the streets, searching for food, for work, for anything that would remind me I still belonged somewhere. Hunger gnawed at me, and loneliness became my shadow. Every face I passed seemed to look away, as if rejection was contagious. Those days weren't just about survival. They were about learning how invisible you can feel when the world decides you don't matter. Statistics show nearly 30% of homeless adults are over the age of 50. And I had just joined that number overnight. I remember clutching my bag tighter whenever footsteps approached, afraid of losing the little I had left. The $100 disappeared quickly. Meals, bus fares, small necessities. And when it was gone, reality hit harder than any insult. Psychologists say sudden displacement triggers a survival mode that rewires the brain, and I felt it. Every decision became about the next hour, not the next day. I wasn't living, I was enduring. And yet, even in that darkness, a small part of me wondered if this was the storm before a new beginning. After those first brutal nights, I realized I couldn't keep drifting. Survival meant finding something steady, even if it was small. A diner on the corner finally gave me a chance. Dishwashing, long hours, low pay. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. The clatter of plates, the smell of frying oil, the rhythm of scrubbing pans. It became my new routine. And for the first time since being cast out, I felt a flicker of stability. Each paycheck was tiny, but it bought me meals, a little dignity, and the reminder that I wasn't completely powerless. Those small steps didn't erase the pain, but they gave me something to stand on. Sociologists say that even small routines can restore a sense of control after trauma. And I felt that truth in every shift. The diner wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline. The regulars began to recognize me, offering nods or small conversations that reminded me I wasn't invisible anymore. I saved coins in a jar, each one a symbol of progress, however slow. And in those quiet moments after closing, when the kitchen was finally still, I realized something important. Survival wasn't just about enduring. It was about building brick by brick, until you had a foundation strong enough to stand on again. It was during one of those long diner shifts that something unexpected happened. I was chatting with a customer while clearing plates, telling a story about my childhood just to pass the time. He paused, looked at me, and said, "You have a gift with words." At first, I laughed it off. I was just talking, nothing special. But that comment stuck with me. That night, after the diner closed, I sat with a notebook and began writing. I poured every ounce of pain, every memory, every thought onto those pages. And slowly, those words became more than just scribbles. They became my lifeline. Writing gave me a voice when I felt invisible. And for the first time since being cast out, I felt like I had something that was truly mine. My notebook became a mirror, reflecting not just pain, but resilience. I wrote about nights on the bus station bench, about the sound of rain on eviction night, about the laughter I once shared with my son, Each page carried a piece of me, and with every story, I felt lighter. Soon, I began sharing those writings online, and to my surprise, people listened. Strangers connected with my words, reminding me that even in rejection, there's a way to be heard. What started as scribbles in a notebook slowly grew into something bigger. I began sharing my writings online, posting short stories and reflections late at night after my diner shifts. To my surprise, people connected with them. Comments poured in, strangers saying my words gave them hope that they felt less alone because of what I shared. That encouragement pushed me further. I polished my drafts, submitted them to small publications, and eventually one of my pieces was accepted. That moment felt like reclaiming a part of myself I thought was gone. With each step, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building a new life, one page at a time. I was invited to speak at a local community event. Standing on that stage, reading my words aloud, I realized I had gone from invisible to seen. Soon after, I compiled my writings into a book. Holding that first printed copy in my hands was more than success. It was proof that rejection doesn't define you. Resilience does. And with every page, I was rewriting not just my story, but my future. 6 months later, life looked very different. I wasn't the broken figure he had cast out. I was standing tall at my first book signing, surrounded by people who had found strength in my words. And then, in the middle of a crowd, I saw him. My son. His eyes didn't carry the same coldness as that night. Instead, they carried something else, regret. He walked up slowly, almost hesitant, and whispered, "I was wrong." For a moment, time froze. The boy I had raised, the man who had rejected me, was now standing in front of me, humbled by the very resilience he once dismissed. That reunion wasn't about money or apologies. It was about recognition that I had survived, rebuilt, and thrived. Experts say witnessing resilience in others can trigger empathy and self-reflection, and I saw that unfold in his eyes. He admitted he hadn't understood the weight of his words, that he thought pushing me away would free him, not realizing it would break us both. Standing there, I realized forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about acknowledging it and choosing to move forward. The applause around us faded into the background, because in that moment, it wasn't about the audience or the book. It was about a father and son, finally seeing each other clearly for the first time in years. Looking back, I realized being cast out wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Pain had forced me to rebuild, and in that rebuilding, I discovered strength I never knew I had. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting the night I was rejected. It meant choosing not to let that moment define me. My son's return reminded me that even broken bonds can be mended, but only when both sides are willing to face the truth. In the end, I learned that resilience isn't about bouncing back to who you were. It's about becoming someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who can carry scars without letting them weigh you down. Experts say forgiveness is less about absolving others and more about freeing yourself. And I found that to be true. Carrying anger only chained me to the past, but letting go gave me room to grow. My journey taught me that rejection can be a redirection, pushing us toward paths we never imagined. And while scars remain, they don't have to be symbols of pain. They can be reminders of survival. So if you've ever felt cast aside, remember this. Sometimes the hardest endings lead to the most powerful beginnings. This story isn't just mine. It's a reminder that rejection doesn't have to be the final chapter. Pain can push us toward strength. And sometimes the hardest endings lead to the most powerful beginnings. If you've ever faced a moment that felt like the end, I want to hear about it. Share your story in the comments, because your words might be the lifeline someone else needs today. And if this journey resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories ahead that prove resilience can rewrite any destiny. Every comment, every shared experience builds a community of resilience. When you speak your truth, you remind others they're not alone. That's the power of storytelling. It connects strangers through shared scars and shared victories. So take a moment, write down your journey, and let it live here. And if you want to keep walking through stories that inspire, challenge, and heal, hit that subscribe button. Together, we'll prove that no rejection, no setback, No heartbreak can silence the human spirit.